Thank you, Tigran, for that very gracious introduction, and it did make me feel just a tiny bit old. But let me begin by saying, Deputy Minister of Economy, Avitesyan, representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Armand, who I know is here in the audience, and of course, Tigran, and members of the American Chamber Board of Directors, other members of the Chamber, and of course, distinguished guests, as well as my colleagues from the embassy, many of whom are here tonight. Let me begin by saying that I am so pleased to be here in front of this audience. I know after 27 years in the Foreign Service that in general, embassies have no better partners for promoting trade and promoting economic growth than American Chambers of Commerce. And I know in this country, we have no better partner than the American Chamber of Armenia. And I want to thank our friends at AmCham for their warmth to me since I've arrived and for hosting this event. My wife, Lee, and I have been so touched by the warm welcome that we've received from all the Armenian people that we've encountered in our initial travels. And we're both delighted to have the opportunity to explore the beautiful country of Armenia and its rich cultural heritage. I am quite aware that I'm the representative of a great power in the world, but I have the fortune of being the representative of that great power in a great nation, the great nation of Armenia, with its great cultural history and tragic but very inspiring future and history. I've been in Armenia now for 9 months this week, and I've been able to use that time to listen and to learn. I've learned from the Armenian officials that I've met. I've learned from the Armenians, young and old, I've met across the country, from Megri to Gyumri. I've learned from Armenia's friends in the American Armenian community, and I've learned from US business people and Armenian business people, like those in the chamber. And I wanted to take that time to listen and to learn, so that I could use what I learned to help shape my own priorities as the US ambassador to Armenia, our own priorities as we build that partnership that Tigran talked about. Tonight, I want to share with all of you what my priorities are as US ambassador, and what they will mean for the US Embassy's programs and its public dialogue during my time here in Yerevan. Let me begin by saying as well that since I arrived here 9 months ago, I've also seen firsthand the incredible strides that Armenia has made since its independence. And this too, that progress, has shaped the priorities that I will lay out for you tonight. The quality of life in this country compared to the beginning of the 1990s has improved immensely. Armenia now has a stable government that is striving to improve delivery of services. There is, I believe, a robust civil society, an educated workforce, a vibrant information technology sector that has clients across the globe, and there's a flourishing agricultural sector as well. And I'm particularly pleased that the close ties between the United States and Armenia have only intensified over the last 2 decades. But of course, for all the very real achievements since 1991, there are also areas where progress has been halting or outright stalled, and I know it is frustrating for all of you in this room. It is disheartening that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict remains unresolved, and the border with Turkey is closed. I know what an impact that has on everyone trying to do business in this country. The US government will continue to pursue government-to-government and people-to-people efforts in order to advance the resolution of these issues. On Nagorno-Karabakh, I can assure you the US government remains committed to helping both parties reach a peaceful, negotiated settlement via the Minsk Group process. With regard to Turkey, we are urging both sides to remain open to efforts at reconciliation and normalization, which I think will promote stability and prosperity in both countries, Turkey and Armenia. Now let me turn to my priorities. Before I arrived in Yerevan, President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry conveyed to me this message. The U.S. government's broad goal in its relationship with Armenia is a democratic, prosperous, secure Armenia at peace with its neighbors. And that overarching goal underpins the 4 priorities that I have set for the embassy's work while I am ambassador. I want to share those priorities with you tonight for the sake of transparency, in large part. After all, as you will hear, if I'm going to call for more accountability in Armenia, then I need to hold my work and that of my embassy colleagues to the same standard. Let me start by saying my first priority will be to deepen the business and trade relations between our 2 countries. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about new aid programs, but trade, the strengthening of our joint commercial ties to the benefit of both our economies. I know this is not a new focus. Our countries have always been interested in expanding our trade and investment relationship. But I think what is new is the U.S. Embassy's assessment that the Armenian economy has reached a level that offers significant new opportunities for commercial relations and for investments in a range of sectors. The kind of trade opportunities that merit and justify both governments taking the sometimes difficult steps to synchronize their trade-related regulations, make their legal regimes better matched, and look at their customs laws. Those are hard steps, but the Armenian economy's maturity justifies making them. So for that reason, just this May, the U.S. and Armenian governments established a high-level forum to explore new ways to develop our economic partnership by committing resources to help expand trade. This forum is called the U.S.-Armenian Council on Trade and Investment, also known as the TIFA Council. And I am delighted to announce that the first meeting of the TIFA Council will take place in Yerevan next week on November 17th, with the participation of representatives from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, other agencies of the U.S. government, and their Armenian government counterparts. During this day-long TIFA session, the 2 sides will discuss key trade topics related to customs, intellectual property rights, non-tariff trade barriers, and government procurement, among other things. We will also establish private sector consultation mechanisms. For me, the private sector consultations are one of the most exciting components of TIFA because they will serve as a guide for the government-to-government talks. Those consultations ensure that we, the U.S. government and the Armenian government, are advocating on the issues that are of importance to business, to people like you in this room. In fact, we plan to organize a separate session with business organizations during the TIFA meeting, including members of the chamber. Then on November 19th, just after the TIFA Council meets, we will hold the annual meeting of the U.S.-Armenia Task Force, called the US-ATF in government speak. The goal of the US-ATF is for both governments to engage at a big picture level, look at big economic policy dialogue questions on issues that could influence Armenia's economic growth and its trade for years to come. This year in the US-ATF, the discussion items will include how to best fight the scourge of corruption, Armenia's future energy strategies, how to improve water management in the country, civil aviation and open skies, the government's progress on establishing a unified tax code, and the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, which I'll touch upon in a few minutes. One of the key areas that I'm looking at when we explore ways of expanding business ties is the prospect of boosting U.S. direct investment into Armenia. Now, I'm very proud that currently the United States is among the largest foreign direct investors in the country. And U.S. investment in Armenia got a huge boost with Contour Global's acquisition of the Voratan hydroelectric cascade, which I'm sure you're all aware of, a $250 million deal that brings to Armenia the technical expertise and the management techniques of one of America's most innovative energy companies. Now, I want to emphasize that Contour Global made this investment and received the support of the Armenian government because it made good commercial sense. I want to stress something that all of you in this room know. The U.S. Embassy cannot force U.S. businesses to invest in Armenia. My powers as ambassador plenipotentiary do not extend that far. It is up to Armenia to attract the investment, as it successfully did in the case of Contour Global. Fundamentally, companies invest where there's predictability and transparency, in everything from taxation to customs regulations to how the courts proceed. Therefore, the U.S. Embassy will focus its work on helping to create a business environment in which every company, established or startup, Armenian, American, Russian, whatever, can compete fairly, thus increasing investor confidence. Now, in discussing U.S. investment in Armenia, I'd like to highlight two recent activities that the Embassy organized to boost U.S. investment here. And these are examples of what I want to see more of in the coming months and years under my tenure. My staff organized a very successful U.S. Franchise Day in September, which brought to Yerevan several U.S. companies interested in franchise opportunities here. We also hosted a U.S. Partnership Opportunity Delegation in October that explored cooperation in the renewable energy sector. I'm working with my staff to organize more such events in the future, and we will be seeking input from the Chamber, from people in this room, on how to make these events as useful and focused as possible. I also want to emphasize that our support for trade and for economic growth in Armenia puts great emphasis on the regions, on outside of Yerevan. Our USAID programs for years have been focused now on getting more development in the regions. And we've been helping develop the Armenian agricultural sector for more than 20 years. I think many of you in this room may know, though I was surprised, to know that the agricultural sector employs 40% of the Armenian labor force and accounts for 20% of Armenian GDP. So agriculture is vitally important to the health and to the growth of the Armenian economy. Our agricultural support programs, now implemented by USAID, currently provide about $12 million in assistance to boost the competitiveness of Armenian agriculture and to grow the economies of rural communities. And I'm very happy that we have the Deputy Minister of Agriculture here, because one of our great partners is the Ministry of Agriculture, and we work successfully in this sector because of the ministry's support. In addition to our sustained partnership in the agricultural sector, we've also explored other means of boosting rural development other than agriculture. For example, and unfortunately I can't give away too much, it's a state secret still, but we'll be announcing later this month a very exciting tourism initiative in cooperation with the Smithsonian Institution in the United States that I believe can inject a burst of oxygen into the economy of rural Armenia over the next several years. Now, let me return to the importance of predictability and the necessity of ensuring a level playing field for businesses as I pivot to what will be my second priority, the fight to help Armenians fight against corruption. I must be frank with all my Armenian friends about the very real toll that corruption exacts on Armenia. I hear about that toll from potential U.S. business investors. I hear it from average Armenians as I travel the country. They all tell me the same. When competition among businesses is not fair, it's not based on objective commercial criteria, when there are powerful interests that have disproportionate economic and political influence, it limits economic growth. It limits opportunities. The whole economy, the whole country suffers. Foreign businesses vote with their investment dollars. If they see a country suffering the ills of corruption, they either don't invest at all or they may just pull their money out. Among Armenians, of course, the burden of corruption falls on the most vulnerable, the small business owner, the young startup entrepreneur who's struggling to start and maintain their operations. And of course, corruption affects more than just the economy. Corruption undermines democracy, it undermines the rule of law, it breeds instability and mistrust in institutions. And frankly, it can threaten a nation's national security. Now, I know that, of course, corruption happens everywhere. It happens in the United States. The key question that any nation must ask is whether there's the political will to attack corruption when it becomes apparent. Whether the media, whether the civil society in that country feel empowered to speak out against corruption. And whether there are reliable judicial processes in place to investigate and prosecute the cases of corruption that do come to light. Now let me be clear, my decision to devote U.S. Embassy attention and resources to fighting corruption in Armenia with our Armenian colleagues and friends and government officials is not a decision I made in a vacuum. The impetus comes from the very top of the U.S. government. In his 2015 National Security Strategy, President Obama outlines why America, at all levels and all sectors, is partnering with nations and institutions fighting corruption across the globe. The security strategy is quite articulate about the dangers corruption presents to growth of democracy, to trade, and to the security of nations around the world. Now, with that in mind, let me explain how I and the embassy, my colleagues here, plan to tackle this issue and help our Armenian friends. First of all, we will continue to work with any Armenian governmental or non-governmental institution that demonstrates a commitment to fighting corruption. This will include U.S. Embassy grants to NGOs that are engaged in anti-corruption activities and that will cooperate with government bodies that make progress in fighting corruption and in increasing transparency within the government. Our work will also conclude support to the government's Anti-Corruption Council. Let me be clear, our financial assistance to the Council supports concrete activities, such as the continued development of the Council's anti-corruption strategy and the establishment of the Council's own action plan. And I like to emphasize that we have made clear to the members of the Council, to the Prime Minister, that we want to support the Council, and we will do so. But our support requires results. If the Council does not deliver, our support will end, plain and simple. And the Prime Minister and the members of the Council so far have accepted that challenge. We are also encouraging NGOs to serve on the Anti-Corruption Council, for we see it as an opportunity for civil society to constructively engage in direct dialogue with the government. Now, the second thing we will do to help in the struggle against corruption is to help civil society in Armenia shine a spotlight on corruption and combat it. This past August and September, for example, I believe the U.S. Embassy, maybe a little, helped expand the conversation about corruption in Armenia through a series of programs and events that culminated with my interview on Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. You can expect the U.S. Embassy in the coming years to carry out similar anti-corruption focused efforts. I'd also like to focus for a moment on the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or EITI, which I mentioned earlier. It is a very important anti-corruption initiative in which the Prime Minister has demonstrated true leadership, and I commend him for that. I was delighted by the Prime Minister's announcement this past summer that the Armenian government intended to join EITI. Now, EITI requires that the government, civil society, and the mining industry in Armenia come together, bring more transparency to the natural resources sector, and foster the clean, sustainable development of Armenia's natural resources. is an enormously powerful tool, EITI is, to ensure transparency and to make sure the Armenian people know where the money is going from their own natural resources. Now, much work remains to be done before Armenia can achieve its goal of becoming first an EITI candidate and ultimately an EITI compliant country. But I assured the government that my embassy stands ready to assist Armenia as it prepares its EITI candidate application. And I hope everyone in this room will keep up with us and ask us how that's going over the next year. Let me now turn to my third priority, the embassy's continuing efforts to strengthen Armenia's democratic institutions, human rights, and civil society. I think everyone in this room knows that it was Winston Churchill who famously said, "Democracy is undoubtedly the worst form of government until compared to all the other options." I agree. My government firmly believes that democracy, for all its faults, is worth the work it requires, because democracy is rooted in the will of the people, and therefore democracy does a better job than any other form of government of respecting the rights and the opinions of individuals, of solving problems peacefully, and of building general prosperity. And one of the necessary ingredients in a functioning democracy is a strong and very independent civil society. This is the reason really why the US government and the US Embassy place so much emphasis on strengthening the rule of law, human rights, civil society, as well as the empowerment through civic and political participation, the empowerment of women, of individuals with disabilities and minority populations, groups that have been traditionally perhaps not as active in political life here. Rest assured, we will continue to place that emphasis in my remarks and our programs in coming years. Now let me say, when I look at democratic institutions, at civil society here in Armenia, I've been encouraged by what I've seen these past 9 months. While progress certainly remains to be made, as it does in every country, and I think particularly in Armenia out in the rural regions, I have observed in particular, and this is what I'd like to focus on, a vibrant civil society that does not hesitate to voice its criticism. In fact, I would assess that Armenian civil society is, perhaps after the Baltic nations, among the most vital and the most active in the former Soviet Union. And that is a credit to Armenia. Many non-governmental organizations cooperate effectively with government institutions, and I strongly support this trend. I think, in fact, one of the most successful examples of government-civil society partnership I've seen is the Trafficking in Persons Interagency Working Group. This group represents virtually all the Armenian government ministries and agencies, civil society representatives, and international organizations that work to stop the scourge of trafficking in persons. And they've had enormous success in this country and been commended by the US government in official publications. Now, while there are such examples of effective government and civil society cooperation, more is needed, definitely. I want to encourage both the Armenian government and civil society organizations to more fully embrace what I would call constructive engagement, and constructive engagement with each other. Too often, the Armenian government does not reach out to civil society to consult on matters of shared interest or to take advantage of the expertise of civil society. And when opportunity does present itself, I find sometimes civil society is skeptical and hesitant to engage with government. Members of civil society must take the lead in constructively pushing for the reforms they want to see in their country. Protests can galvanize the public, and they can serve to create an environment for change, and they are very, very important. But setting realistic goals, engaging with government, building advocacy campaigns are equally important, and it requires patience and dedicated work. My message to civil society is this: develop your organizational skills, develop your advocacy capacities, and build up local Armenian constituencies. Try to become independent and financially sustainable, because this is what Armenian society needs. Strong, savvy, financially sustainable NGOs that can represent the needs and the concerns of their constituencies here in Armenia. That is certainly the goal of every program we have that works with NGOs and civil society in Armenia. We're not here to keep civil society going forever on the US taxpayer dime. We want to see them create their own sustainable business plans. Now, I've spoken at length about Armenia and the areas of partnership and engagement that we will be prioritizing. I'd like to end by talking about my last priority, which is really about my own country and about the embassy. My fourth and last priority is that we, the US Embassy and me personally, need to do a better job of explaining US policies to the Armenian people. And I mean, not so much our bilateral policies, not talking about the values and the history that combine Armenia and the United States. I think the embassy, my predecessors have done a very good job of that. But I think we need to do a better job of talking about US policies in the wider world, US foreign policy around the globe. I know this can seem a little bit surprising, but although information seems but a keystroke away in our world of internet connectivity and mobile devices, many Armenians I've spoken with tell me, quite frankly, they do not understand US foreign policy. They do not understand how the values that the US promotes around the globe can make the world more secure, more prosperous, more free. They say it is difficult to find opportunities to hear the official US message. To me, that means the embassy has to communicate our messages more clearly, and we have to look for opportunities to address new audiences in Armenia. So going forward, I will be working with my staff to explore various avenues for explaining US policy goals around the world to different audiences. And that will be done by me and by members of the staff, many of whom are here tonight. Now, with that priority in place, I'm going to put it into practice and take advantage of the opportunity my appearance before this very prestigious and very important audience presents to briefly discuss two aspects of US foreign policy that I think are of particular interest to people in this room and to Armenia and the neighborhood. Those are our relations with Russia and Iran. Serious topics, I have to take a drink. Our overarching goal, the US's goal on the European continent, is one that we have been working on for 25 years, since the end of the Cold War. A Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. The United States and our allies stand for democratic choice, for collective security, for peace, for tolerance and prosperity. These are our values, and we reaffirm them with pride. The challenges that we've faced in recent years, Russian aggression in Ukraine, the fight against ISIL, the Syrian civil war, and the refugee tragedy there, these have reinforced our dedication to these values, and they've strengthened the bonds that the United States shares with its transatlantic allies. It is no secret that the United States and Russia have some stark policy differences at the moment, especially with regard to Ukraine and Syria. However, let me be clear, we have sought and found common ground and been able to cooperate on other issues, most notably on the Iran nuclear issue and also within the OSCE Minsk Group process, where I know from firsthand observation and discussions that the Russian and US co-chairs work very closely along with the French co-chair. But fundamentally, there is a current of distrust between the United States and Russia. And I am asked often by Armenians about how this affects the way we view the Armenian-Russian relationship. Let me say that we recognize, as a reality of geography and of history, that there's a significant Russian presence in Armenia and that you have strong historical ties. I believe, as I think most Armenians do, that this strong Armenian-Russian relationship and Armenia's membership in the Eurasian Economic Union and Armenia's membership in the Collective Security Treaty Organization should not and do not preclude Armenia from also pursuing strong, mutually beneficial relations with the United States, the European Union, and other partners, as well as with organizations like NATO and the Council of Europe. These relationships are not mutually exclusive. It is not a zero-sum world. We all benefit if we're engaged with many partners. On the broader question of U.S. views towards Russia, let me quote Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, who spoke to this very issue in a speech she gave in January 2015 at the Brookings Institution in Washington. She said, "The United States rejects the narrative of grievance that is popular in Moscow today. The narrative that says we wanted a weak Russia. Nothing could be further from the truth. What the United States wanted, what the United States still wants, is a strong democratic Russia that respects the rule of law at home and abroad and its neighbors' sovereignty. A Russia that will work with the United States and with Europe to build peace and security. The United States alone has spent more than $20 billion since 1992 to help Russia strengthen and open its economy, to promote good health in Russia, to promote clean and more open governance and elections in Russia, to promote non-proliferation, reduce the risk of nuclear catastrophe, and promoted closer ties between Russia and NATO, including inviting Russia to join and participate in operations and joint exercises. But this kind of cooperation couldn't and can't continue when Russia tramples on the rules of the international system, when it bites off pieces of its neighbors' territory and tries to bully some of its neighbors into economic and political submission. But let me be clear, as Secretary Nuland was, there is an off-ramp for Russia, a route back to better ties with all of us, with the United States and with the Atlantic allies, and it's very simple. The minute Russia allows Ukraine to control its side of the international border and stops fueling the conflict, the situation will improve. The weapons and fighters will stop flowing, hostages will come home, sanctions can start to roll back. Full implementation of the Minsk agreement is the cornerstone of achieving this. And once that is achieved, then all the issues that are on the plate can be decided within Ukraine by Ukrainians. And that's the very thing Moscow always says that it wants. Let me turn to Iran. Since Armenia and Iran enjoy neighborly relations, I do want to touch on this topic. And I considered it an extraordinary achievement, partially achieved with the help of Armenia, the adoption of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, on October 18th. That marked an important milestone in our goal of preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and ensuring that the Iranian nuclear program will be exclusively peaceful going forward. Let me begin by saying that the US government recognizes and appreciates how Armenia worked to respect the international community's sanctions on Iran over the last years. And we knew that this came at some cost to Armenia and to its economy, and perhaps to some individuals in this very room. Armenia's support for the international community's effort to stop Iran from building a bomb was a meaningful sign of how seriously Armenia takes its role in the larger international community. And it was this kind of international unity that made it possible to achieve the agreement via diplomatic means that removed the potential for an Iranian nuclear weapon. Since there's enormous interest here in the outcome of the JCPOA, let me explain just what happens next. We expect, my government expects, as do all of the international community, that Iran will take the necessary steps outlined in the agreement to begin to dismantle its nuclear weapons program. And if those steps are completed and verified by the International Atomic Energy Administration, the IAEA, The parties then will have reached what under the document is called Implementation Day, or I-Day. If and when I-Day is reached, certified by the IAEA, the U.S. government and the international community will then be obligated under the agreement to lift the relevant nuclear-related sanctions. And Secretary Kerry has spoken about the U.S. government's commitment to remove the sanctions as quickly as possible once I-Day is achieved. But I have to emphasize for now, all sanctions remain in place. And the United States, with our international partners, is working to assure that the IAEA has the resources it needs to verify that Iran's commitments are met. But until that happens, the sanctions are in place. And it remains important that they remain in place so that there still is pressure on Iran to carry out its obligations under the agreement. I've mentioned a few specific foreign policy issues, our wider goals in Europe, Russia, and Iran. Let me step back a moment and end with the big picture. Secretary Kerry recently said, "We live in extraordinary, complicated times." And so the United States looks ahead. The U.S. strategy is to lay the groundwork for solutions that will strengthen the community of nations for decades to come. But to succeed in that, we must mobilize the help and the support of allies and friends across the globe, because the United States cannot do it alone. And on that note, I would like to praise Armenia for helping us not be alone, for its strong and expanding participation in peacekeeping missions around the world, whether they be NATO or UN. Many of you may know Armenia has been a member of the NATO Partnership for Peace program since 1994, and it has earned the praise and the gratitude of NATO leaders for its contributions to NATO operations in Kosovo and Afghanistan. We've also welcomed Armenia's participation in the UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon, and potentially in Mali as well. Armenia is stepping up to help us, as Secretary Kerry said, find solutions for the community of nations. Armenia is a wonderful country that is achieving great things. I have seen so many positive changes since I first started working on Armenian issues back in the 1990s. Changes that have benefited the Armenian people and brought our two countries, the United States and Armenia, even closer together. Of course, there is always work that needs to be done. I believe the 4 priorities that I've identified will help the U.S. government and the U.S. people provide the people and government of Armenia with the tools and resources they need to find Armenian solutions to the challenges this great nation faces. We at the Embassy will be working to increase our bilateral business and trade ties. We will be helping Armenians fight corruption. We will be partnering with Armenia to strengthen its democratic institutions and civil society. And I promise a more robust engagement to explain the broad range of U.S. foreign policy goals so Armenians have a better understanding of what the U.S. role in the world is and how we see Armenia's place in it. I invite all of you to judge the success of my ambassadorship by how strongly and faithfully we carry out these goals, by what we achieve. Thank you all for your patience. I realize this has been a long speech, but I hope it has been useful in furthering our close collaborative dialogue. I hope I have the opportunity to speak with many of you personally during the second half of this evening. And let me close again by saying thank you very, very much, and thank the Chamber.